I want to put the toll-free number up for Congress. And I won't want you to believe Alex Jones. I want you to go get these news stories off my website. I want you to call these major newspapers. I want you to find out these statements were true by the White House about preparing for martial law. And I want you to let them know that if there is any terrorism, we know who to blame. The point is, if any terrorism comes, it's from this government. And if there was an outside threat like a bin Laden, who was a known CIA asset in the 80s, running the Mujahideen war, and whose family builds all the military bases over in Saudi Arabia right now, and sits on the board of Iridium Satellite, he's the boogeyman they need in this Orwellian phony system. I want the White House numbers up there now. A big part of this solution, after you research all the government terrorism and check out what I'm saying is true, call the White House and tell them, we know the government's planning terrorism. We know Oklahoma City and World Trade Center was terrorism. We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to blow up airliners, Baltimore Sun. If you do it, we're going to blame you because we know who's up to it. Or if you let some terrorist group do it, like the World Trade Center, we know who to blame. And you could save the planet. I'm calling it Operation Expose the Government Terrorist.
Good morning, America. I'm Charles Gibson.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
It is lunchtime in London, 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, and 8 a.m. here in New York, live from the CNN Financial News headquarters.
It is beautiful outside, perfect September day with lots of sunshine. Oh, would you look at Washington, huh? I'm going outside today.
Other than that, it's kind of quiet around the country. We like quiet. It's quiet. It's too quiet.
Is that American 11 trying to call?
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and we'll be okay. We're returning to the airport.
The pilot, everyone's been stabbed. They're in the back of the airplane. They're not. Oh, the hijackers are in the cockpit. Oh, no. Okay, we just lost connection.
This is CNN breaking news.
This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
There is a major incident in Lower Manhattan.
We just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
We have serious news of a major possible air crash in the United States.
An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center.
That happened within the last few moments.
Just a few moments ago, something believed to be a plane crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. We have no idea what it was. It was a tremendous boom.
A gigantic sonic boom. The air is filled with hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper that are just sort of floating like confetti.
Stuff just started falling, like bricks and paper and everything. When I looked...
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but complete completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, much earlier today because of, course, the dreadful collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But New York, very much a city still in chaos. The phones are not working properly. The subway lines are not working properly. And we know that down there near the World Trade Center, there are 3 schools that are being turned into triage centers for emergency treatment. And I know that over in New York Harbor, where the famous Statue of Liberty is.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Rick Leventhal was in downtown Manhattan when the buildings came down and has an update for us from Lower Manhattan. Rick?
Well, John, we're on Church Street at Reed Street, for those of you familiar with Lower Manhattan, just a few blocks away from World Trade. Still thick black smoke billowing from the scene where both towers collapsed. Again, just a few blocks away from us. We were standing out here on Church Street when both towers came tumbling down. And each time there was a huge cloud of smoke and debris that came roaring down this street, and everyone literally ran for their lives. At this point, the police have been efforting to establish a perimeter. They're trying to keep people back and make sure that no one interferes with their job, which is to try and secure the area and then get inside that World Trade Center rubble to see whether or not they can locate any survivors who may have been inside the building or just outside the building when it came tumbling down. We want to bring in Mark Walsh, who's a freelancer for Fox. You live just a few blocks away and witnessed.
Dude, I live on the 43rd floor of a building which is 5 blocks from the World Trade Center itself. I witnessed the entire thing from beginning to end.
People talk about how it looked like a movie. I know when I came walking down here early this morning and saw both towers on fire and people on every street corner, it was like a movie. But you watched the planes hit the towers.
I was watching with my roommate. It was approximately several minutes after the first plane had hit. I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
Obviously, there were a lot of people inside the buildings at the time.
Two guys from the 7th precinct, the 1st precinct, the fire department right here, the 7th truck, those guys are all right there at ground zero when those things went down. And God bless, I know there's a lot of guys there that were around there, and hopefully they made it out.
What was happening around you, in the streets around you, as this was all going down?
Absolute pandemonium. From my viewpoint up 43 floors, I could see people running like ants, just absolutely scurrying for their lives. Billows of smoke coming through the streets, just walking down the street, just pushing everybody back. And then several minutes after, it looked like it had just snowed over the entire area.
Yeah, the debris, the soot was thick on the street. There's still a dusting of it out here. But when I was standing here and the towers collapsed, we saw police officers running for their lives, screaming, "Get back, get back, get back!" And I'll tell you, that's a wake-up call when you see cops running for their lives, and people too, women's pushing baby carriages, that sort of thing.
Well, you had the first tower first. That one, when that first went down, it just pushed everybody back, and it was a good 15 minutes before the second tower finally collapsed. Yeah. And it was just overwhelming, and by that point, it was just insane.
Well, hearing a lot of similar stories from people who were inside the building. One gentleman we spoke to earlier today, John, was on the 77th floor and said it was a relatively orderly evacuation at that point after the first plane hit the first tower. Everyone going down the stairs, not a lot of panic. But when they got to the 6th floor, he says they felt a second shake. And then people started to really be concerned. Obviously, there were people in the building at the time of this, and some of those people, they haven't recovered them yet. And that's a big issue right now, is trying to get the rescue workers and the emergency crews to the building. There were police officers there and emergency crews there when this was all happening, and they were right at ground zero when it all went down. So can we talk to you? What's your role out here right now?
Just standing by right now. Can't say what role I'm playing right now.
Well, there's a lot of standing by. There's also concern that some of these other buildings might actually come down. This building right here with the glass that you see, the nearest tall building, that has structural damage as well. We saw a lot of glass broken out, and a corner of the building appeared to be in distress, and there's concern that there might actually be another collapse of that building. And I can also tell you that when we first got here, we were a few blocks up. We could actually see debris from one of the planes on the street, a huge gear at one point, looked like a piece of an engine at another point. So that debris is still littering that area up there. They had roped it off with police tape, and they had FBI agents out there, and that was just before the first tower came tumbling down and everyone went running away. So there's evidence out here. There's a lot of work left to be done, and as you can imagine, the streets are a bit chaotic at this point. But I just want to show you one drastic difference looking north as opposed to looking south. Blue skies, clear streets, not a lot going on over there. But then come back around this way, Dan, and you'll see just smoke billowing from the scene. Still obviously a major disaster waiting to be cleaned up. Back to you, John.
All right, Rick Leventhal in Lower Manhattan, thank you very much. A dark day in America, September 11th, 2001.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think, you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747, or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
You know, Donna, we were looking at pictures all morning long of that plane coming into building number 2, and when you see that approach the far side, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of a millisecond, the explosion pops out the other side.
Right. I just think that it was a plane with more than just fuel. I think, obviously, they were very big planes. They were going very rapidly.
As soon as Congress acts on this bill, the men our intelligence agencies believed helped orchestrate the 9/11 attacks can face justice. bill would also provide clear rules for our personnel involved in detaining and questioning captured terrorists. The information that the Central Intelligence Agency has obtained by questioning men like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has provided valuable information and has helped disrupt terrorist plots, including strikes within the United States. For example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed described the design of planned attacks on buildings inside the U.S. and how operatives were directed to carry them out. That is valuable information for those of us who have the responsibility to protect the American people. He told us the operatives have been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. The explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
Bottom line, in my professional opinion, based on my years of experience, my study of airline accidents and incidents, it's my opinion that a Boeing 757 did not hit the Pentagon. There would be an abundance of wreckage, and that the official sources have not been able to produce the evidence of any wreckage. Large tail sections, indestructible landing gear, indestructible engines, wing spars, fuselage, seats, anything of the sort indicates to me that a 757 did not hit the Pentagon.
In relation to the Pentagon, it's quite obvious that no Boeing 757 hit the building. There are multiple lines of reasoning that support that conclusion, including, for example, the complete lack of massive debris of the kinds and character that would be expected from a 100-ton airliner with a 125-foot wingspan and a tail that stands 44 feet above the ground. The hit point was only about 10 feet high and 16 or 17 feet wide on the ground floor. You find unbroken windows, undamaged fence, a couple of automobiles. What you don't find is massive piles of aluminum debris. You don't find the wings. You don't find the seats, the bodies, the luggage, the tail. Not even the engines were recovered, indicating that no Boeing 757 hit the building.
You've got a hole that's no more than 10 foot high and about maybe 15 to 20 feet wide that we're expected to believe a multi-tonned 757 jetliner with a wingspan of 125 feet and a tail height of 44 feet, that's 4 stories, folks, somehow managed to squeeze through this one little bitty hole in the ground floor of the Pentagon.
Before the outer wall collapsed, which was about 45 minutes after initial impact, there was only one hole, about 14 to 16 feet. And supposedly, the 757 completely penetrated this hole without leaving any indication of where the wings would have penetrated. Adjacent to this hole, the windows were completely intact, and you can tell by the firefighters' foam that was sprayed around the hole and sticking to the windows are completely intact, both adjacent where the wings should have penetrated and knocked the windows out, and also directly above the hole where the elevated tail section would have penetrated. You know, the windows are completely intact.
I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon, and I said, the plane does not fit in that hole. So what did hit the Pentagon? What hit it? Where is it? What's going on?
I know from my experience that it would have been highly improbable that even a seasoned American test pilot, a military test pilot, could have flown a T-category aircraft like the 757 into the first floor of the Pentagon because of a thing called ground effect.
The official trajectory has this plane just skimming the ground at about 500 miles an hour as it impacts with the building on the ground floor. That turns out to be aerodynamically impossible. Even a small plane, such as a Cessna at full throttle, would accumulate a packet of compressed gas, which is there beneath the fuselage, that would make it impossible for it to get closer than 15 feet to the ground. Discussions with aeronautical engineers have convinced me that for a Boeing 757 at 500 miles an hour, it could not get closer than 60 feet to the ground. If the plane had been taking the official trajectory, its engines would have been making massive damage to the lawn. Wake turbulence would have been wrecking it. The lawn would have been a mess. Instead, the lawn is perfectly smooth, green and smooth, which turns out to be, ironically, a smoking gun at the Pentagon.
Ground effect and the pristine condition of the lawn in front of the Pentagon aren't the only problems with the official story. The airline pilots that we talked with also have a very serious problem as to whether or not terrorists that were trained on small aircraft were even capable of maneuvering a large commercial airliner at such a high speed and making these very precise maneuvers.
I flew the two actual aircraft which were involved in 9/11, the flight number 175 and flight 93, the 757 that allegedly went down at Shanksville, and flight 175 is the aircraft that's alleged to have hit the South Tower. I don't believe it's possible for, like I said, for a terrorist, a so-called terrorist, to train on a 172 then jump in the cockpit of a 757, 767 glass cockpit and vertical navigate the aircraft, lateral navigate the aircraft, and fly the airplane at speeds exceeding its design limit speed by well over 100 knots, make high-speed, high-bank turns, pulling probably 5, 6, 7 Gs, and the aircraft would literally fall out of the sky. I couldn't do it, and I'm absolutely positive they couldn't do it.
I'm Leanne McAdoo with Infowars.com, reporting here from Times Square. I am standing next to Rudy Dent. He's a 32-year veteran of the New York City Fire Department. He's worked as well with the New York City Police Department, and you retired right after 9/11. He was there on 9/11. He saw World Trade Center Tower 7 come down. Rudy, tell us about what happened that day.
Well, I was off that day, and I received a call at home, and I got to see both buildings come down on TV. I jumped on my motorcycle. I did about 120 miles an hour across the Tappan Zee. I reported to my firehouse, and then I got my gear. A bunch of us got together. We commandeered a mail truck, and we made our way down to the site. At that time, Building 7 was still up. I saw Building 7 come down. My fellow firefighters who were there, they did that involuntary jerk when a loud explosion goes off. You know, you can't help it, and they did. I'm a Vietnam veteran too, so I kind of didn't jump like they did, but there was an explosion. The building did come down in complete classical controlled demolition. It came down on its own footprint. There's no question about that. As a matter of fact, Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers has completely handled that from his area of expertise. Okay.
Now, we heard rumblings, things that the fire department was saying that they were overhearing Larry Silverstein talking to his insurance company of whether or not he should have the building pulled. In your professional opinion, was the building pulled?
Well, let me say this. In the New York City Fire Department, as I said, I had 32 years there. I was a chauffeur, and I was also a trained fire marshal. A fire marshal is considered an expert witness in court. He's like a forensic detective. He has the power to administer the oath, take testimony, and issue a subpoena. That's a lot of power. And he's a highly trained investigative person in his area of expertise, in arson. And we have no term that I know of that says pulling buildings. That's not our area of expertise. We've never done that. We don't do that. So for him to say that, I don't know where he pulled that out of, but it's just not part of our operations, okay?
Right, so the fire department doesn't have the training to pull a building, to demo a building like that.
We're not trained to do that. We've never done that in my 32 years. I know of no evolution whatsoever that does that.
And then talk to me a little bit, obviously, as a professional in the fire department for 30 plus years, they're saying that blaming it on office fires, just a few office fires.
Well, if it wasn't so serious a situation, that would be completely laughable. That is ridiculous. First of all, our guys were up there. They were calling for additional hand lines to mop up the isolated pockets of fire. And let me just explain one thing. Never in the history of the world, never in the history of high-rise skyscrapers has ever a skyscraper ever come down because of fire. And I'm talking massive fire. And you know the reason why? Because fire does not burn by itself hot enough to compromise and melt steel. What we had in the World Trade Center, and I saw myself, was molten lava-like pockets of molten steel. All right, I spent the night on the pile searching for bodies, and I saw that with my own eyes. So who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe a bunch of government bureaucrats or my fellow brothers, which I lost 343 guys that day? And I lost Tommy O'Hagan, Bruce Van Hines, and Kenny Kumpel. And I can never forget that. I think of that before I go to bed. I think about it the first thing in the morning when I wake up. And it's in honor of them and their family that I will continue to do everything I can to make the rest of the world wake up to the fact that this was a false flag operation.
Right. And now, as you're out there with professionals who understand what it is that they're seeing, what were you all saying to each other when you're looking at this molten lava?
Well, we were overcome with grief. First of all, we lost 343 guys. We weren't talking about that. If you look at the numerous videos, you'll see the guys bent over in incredible grief. One of the things that we have in the fire department is an incredible brotherhood. We do what we do, an aggressive interior attack, because we believe in each other. We know that our guys will pull us out if we get into trouble. And if we lose somebody, we're family. We're very close. We know each other's families. We know each other's children. And one of the things that I've been privy to is I'm proud of, is that the New York City Fire Department is a calling. It brings out the best in guys, in men who put their lives on the line to save other people's lives. New York City Fire Department is probably the least integrated of all the services, right? When I first came into the firehouse, it was all heavy brogues and stuff. But those same guys, I've seen them bent over giving mouth to little black children that they've just pulled out of a building. And typically when you die or when you cease to start to breathe, you throw up. And they gave them mouth to mouth. I've seen incredible acts of heroism. I love my fellow firefighters. We love each other, and I'm dedicated to exposing this false flag that took their lives.
What do your comrades say to you? What do people say to you? Because we've tried to talk to some people, and of course, they have to worry about their pension and things like that.
They cannot comment, and I'm retired. But while I was on, I was approached by the news, and I deferred from commenting for two reasons. First of all, I was at 1993, the first bombing, and I saw that. I stood shoulder to shoulder with the FBI while they foraged for little paint chips. And with their forensic science, they can take that paint chip and tell you the make and model of a vehicle that it belonged to. All right? And that was a bombing. This was a bombing.
What did you think about them taking all of the debris away so quickly?
That was a crime in and of itself, because the classical thing that any investigator is taught is protect the crime scene. And NIST and the 9/11 Commission lied to the public. I mean, you cannot be that stupid. You cannot be that stupid. In law, as a former police officer, every crime or offense has a degree of mental culpability. Either you knowingly, intentionally, recklessly, or negligently committed the act. And the mere fact that there were obviously the definition of a conspiracy is when two or more people acting in concert knowingly commit an offense or a crime, all right? A misdemeanor or a felony, an offense. That is the definition of a conspiracy. Was this a conspiracy? Absolutely. Yes, it was. And those people need to go to jail for treason.
Is there anything else that you want to say to anyone out there, anyone who might be wanting to come forward but they're scared?
I want to thank you because you're all we have. InfoWars, right? And independent press to try to get the word out to the public because the public is mesmerized by the mainstream media. And let me give you my opinion of the mainstream media. The mainstream media is, their mission is to act as the most effective weapon of mass deception and public manipulation the world has ever seen. And if you don't think that's so, ask anyone any taboo question that the mainstream media frowns upon with its army of trusted celebrity prostitutes. Right. All right?
We've seen
and you will see a sadly predictable knee-jerk reactionary response from the public because that's what they've been trained to believe and trust in.
Right.
All right?
Absolutely. Well, we are very glad that you took the time to speak with us to try and help break through that paradigm. We see, you know, here it is, it's very much like they live all around us with all this programming and just consistent programming with the ceremony. And we're just so thankful that people like you aren't afraid to speak out, aren't afraid to be laughed at, aren't afraid to be, you know, your friends say, what are you doing, man? Come on, maybe disrespectful.
You know, I think times are telling because, as you know, my name is Rudy Dent. I did an interview with Ludowski, yeah. And that interview got over 51,000 views and still climbing. It got over 1,500 likes, and it only got 32 insults.
Right.
All right?
The
so
people,
that's not bad.
They're ready for the truth, and they can think, you know, 13 years, people are going to forget. We will never forget. We remember. You remember.
This. The founding fathers were up against impossible odds. They were up against King George III, upon whose holdings the sun never set. They were only 4%, and look what happened.
The explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escape.